What's up, guys? Steven here. So I'm a developer strategist. I know the group mentioned needing me to create a 1-minute intro talking about myself, but I figured that rather than do that and be boring and mundane, I would kind of drop some value up front, and I guess in that you would get an understanding of what it is I do, right? So one of the things that essentially have been on my fucking mind recently is the aspect of engine optimization and how to go about raising awareness and traffic in the new landscape that we find ourselves in today, where Google and many of the most prominent search engines are quite literally in the process of revamping the algorithms that have to do with ranking a particular search result. So put simply, as opposed to the past where you could essentially just spam pay Stephen Wanji, pay Stephen Wanji, pay Stephen Wanji, pay Stephen Wanji money, pay Stephen. You could just do that over and over and over and over again in a web page and literally rise in the ranks as far as search results that have to do with money or Stephen Wanji. You can no longer do that because many of these search engines have essentially realized that they need to essentially reconsider, or if you want to call it, recalibrate the processing that has to do with the crawler, or how I'll simply say or denote to be the Autobot that is charged with reading your website as if he was reading your story, and reading it in such a way that he's doing it, and he's literally reading every single element or character that is found in your website, as if Genesis, the first word, to Revelation, the last comma, right? And so in doing that, he can essentially know your website inside and out. Now, in the past, what would happen is upon reading your website, and as he does that, keeping account of all of what you can simply denote to be unique variables or unique values. So just think a word. He keeps counts of every unique word he encounters, and thereby causing what you can essentially say a skewering or a manipulation of the metrics that I will define to be relevance, which is essentially an Autobot's or the Autobot in question's ability to retrieve information, intel, or data that is on some level going to most likely cause a response from you to be excellent or satisfactory in terms of assisting your search in the subject matter presented by the keywords that you've inputted in the search box. So in the past, this would be essentially manipulated by, as I mentioned, the spammy tactics that I just demonstrated, right? So just saying the words over and over and over again. And the realization that in the, I guess, the original days of the internet, where websites were essentially not so complex, you only had to deal with simple text, right? So there was not a lot of sense of complexified data. And so they didn't really have a hard job because they were just reading words, right? So you were just orating, essentially reading a book. Now, though, where there's a wide variety in terms of the kind of value you can put in a website, there is a greater challenge and if you want to call it, a greater demand to sanitize the logic of this Autobot, right? Now, in the past, what would occur is every time you mention a particular word, it would essentially tie into a simple math that is just keeping count of the number of times a uniquely mentioned word is used, right? So if I say money and then and I've never said it before, and then I say another word like Stephen Wanji, or I say another word like website, these are count totals that are separate from one another, right? And so increasing your ranking essentially causing for the increase in count total of that particular word, because at the time there were not a lot of websites, and so search engine companies were not thinking about someone potentially abusing this poor Autobot, right? But now we've come to a place where the internet is essentially reaching a mature stage. And so they're realizing that they have to go about thinking about things in a different way, right? Which brings me to the subject at hand, which I will simply illustrate in 3 use cases. A search query that is tied to how to make money online, or how to make more money. A search query, that's use case number 1. Use case number 2 would be a search query that is tied to losing weight or burning fat, losing weight and gaining more muscle. So let's just call it getting ripped. And then that's use case number 2. And use case number 3 would be a search query that would be tied to getting laid with hotter girls and attracting hotter girls and higher quality girls, which we'll simply define as girls with which you share a natural affinity with and a natural chemistry, thereby causing for when that rapport is being created between the both of you, there is a organic bond that is fostered, and thus the two parties at hand ultimately wish to spend more time together, thereby causing that general unfolding of that interpersonal awesome relationship, right? In these 3 use cases, you'll kind of get a sense of how the science of determining relevance is actually more of a contextual thing than an objective, concrete, logical result, right? So in use case number 1, when we talk about how to make more money, you can essentially dice it in a couple ways, right? One way is doing what I call raising your earning potential, right? And this is essentially done by having the, if you want to call it, mission objective of increasing the amount of revenue that can be generated in one duration in time, right? So the simplest way I put it is how much money can you essentially generate in, I guess, 1 unit of time. You can say in 1 shift, in 1 operation, in 1 value delivery process, however you want to put it, right? But how much essentially money can you earn at once, right? And in that earning potential offshoot, you can think of the different things that would have to occur, right? So having to raise your skill set, having to get more high-end demand skill set, thereby meaning that you essentially having to deepen your expertise, your knowledge about something, and the overall commercial applications that tie into said knowledge base, right? And then on top of that, how to go about positioning yourself in such a way that it would be actually beneficial to people to reach out, right? So that's one way, right? The second way would be I use the game of wealth and finances, And this has to do with essentially investing, right? So the concept that the mission objective here would essentially be depreciating expenses, so decreasing expenses, right? So that's another offshoot. And all too often, there are ways of doing it. So, I mean, there's a couple ideas you can think of is just decreasing spending, right? So not spending all of the allotted income, right? The other way is also increasing the amount of disposable income. So how much money you're able to spend freely, and doing it by using an approach that involves essentially raising, you can call it the overall transactional calculus that surrounds your life, right? So for a better idea of this, you can essentially refer back to a post that I made a while ago called, I think it was like questions and answered, a foray into investing. There's also a video called, I think it's like swag income on taxes and your business, the world view, and how paying taxes tie into the overall upgrade of what you're doing, something like that, and how it actually makes you more money in doing this, right? And then there was another one called, I think it's like on global development, right? There's a couple videos in that entire swag income that you should just kind of take a look at. And it will kind of give you an idea of, if you want to call it, the growth related rate of changes to pay attention to, and I guess the game of money you can go about optimizing, right? So another way of putting this is like you're building a fort or palace that's like intergenerational in span, and you're approaching it from the concept of like Legos from back in the day, where by buying into a stock, you're essentially buying that Lego piece that you can then add into your lifestyle and then become the lifestyle engineer. And if done in a tactical manner, can then create an ambiance, if you will, an ecosystem where the decisions you're making of buying an investment or of making an investment have to do with creating a complementary ecosystem, basically a web of modules that interplay with one another in such a way that they add in like a skill effect boost that upgrades the other, right? So basically buying a natural resource stock makes it to where gas, oil, electric, and energy is overall cheaper for you, which creates the base for anything that has to do with hard materials. So refinement like semiconductors or chipsets, or companies that even have to do with motors or engines become cheaper because the base upon, if you think about the resources and need to make a motor are cheaper, so then that company is cheaper, and then that means that like the very maybe entertainment technologies that use these things. So a motor is also a fan, right? It's also an HVAC, it's also a solar panel, right? But it's also a fucking nowadays fucking a supercomputer, right? Because the hypercomputers or the supercomputer now need a lot of cooling power, right? They need a component that like keeps it cool and prevents it from running hot. So the PS5 is in fact using, you can call it a micro motor on some level, from my understanding and my research of it, right? And so that becomes cheaper. And so when it gets to the point of buying the Facebook or the Tesla or the PlayStation stock, it's radically fucking cheaper because all of the things like Adam Smith, Wealth of Nation type like approach that go into building that thing are just dramatically cheaper, and it's kind of like this domino stacking effect, right? So that's another way of doing it. And then a third way of doing it is by essentially playing the game of, as I mentioned, on one way you can amortize your assets, so kind of what I just mentioned, and on the other hand, you can also depreciate your assets. Depreciate your expenses. So making decisions that have to do to where you try to incur has little penalty cost, right? So think of, for example, when you go to withdraw money from the ATM, or think of, for example, when you incur debt by taking on a loan, right? Or think of, for example, when you go about lending someone money, right? Incurring risk, right? So on some levels, that's why, for example, or think something as simple as like withdrawing money from Cash App and paying that 25 cents for instant deposit, right? Shit like that. Shit where if you continually live your life in such a way where you try to do things to where they won't charge you fees, you then on some level increase the interest that that particular bank or financial institution has for you, because if you look at remember the assets and liabilities equation, assets equals liabilities, or assets equal equity minus liabilities, right? If you look at that equation and based on your decisions, you have consistently shown yourself to be a dude who makes the assets sheet or the asset side of the equation go up and their liability side of the equation go down. And so you literally just quite effectively become more valuable, which is why when it comes to lending power or buying power, as I'll simply surmise, you're able to just do more with your $1 because there's actually vested interest in the decisions you make. You just become an impact player and you're rewarded for it, right? Now, my point in saying all of this is all of the fucking ramifications that have to do with understanding that are so contextual that when it comes to the poor Autobots logic that have to do with, is this information related to the search query, then you understand that it's going to have to be driven on some form of graph or a web-like computational approach. Meaning, what was the last page I visited? Okay, and what was the page before that? Okay, and then what was, if you want to call it, the parent idea that led me to, if you want to call it, that separation point? Okay, and then do they all relate to each other in a consistent way, right? Does it make sense that when he's talking about depreciating expenses, right, and or when he's talking about amortizing your assets, it truly has to do with money, right? From, remember the original contention where I'm not just spamming money, but there is a natural relation. And I guess this kind of has ties into natural language itself, right? How you go about building AI. But does it have a relation point, a la discrete mathematics, like an intersection of the two sets? Yes, okay, so there's a relation. Then you do the same question asked for all of the scenarios mentioned, and you're like, oh yeah, there is a relation. So that means by virtue of being there's a commonality, thus point is proven, and then you draw that square like you're doing the proof, right? And then that's how it would say, okay, so based on everything I just did, I can prove that all of the information I'm showing is going to be relevant, right? Now, this is the point that they realized when they saw that when it came down to the web page computation, it had to undergo a change in terms of relation. Meaning you couldn't just count or rely on maintaining the count of a word to matter into the ranking. Instead, you had to essentially rely on the way or you had to essentially keep track of the way you read the page. So, okay, left to right, and then keep track of all the words that have been absorbed. So, I am a good guy, right? And then you keep track of how, though, that, if you want to call it, the combination of those unique words make a value sentence proposition. And then if the value sentence proposition had a relation with the overall key search, then you could say that there was a relational relevant result, right? It was actually going to most likely be effective for the user's subject matters, if you want to call it research, right? So that was the one aspect. And then the second aspect was what I was going to bring to the next point is accuracy. Accuracy is the Autobot's ability to essentially bring up result that's actually pertaining to the subject matter at hand, right? So if you think of the performance of a search engine, you think of relevance, how noteworthy is it to my search? And accuracy is it actually talking about like money or me or whatever search word I put in, right? Is it actually tying to that? And so when it came down to the accuracy metric, there was also a realization that it no longer mattered that a lot of pages that may have a slick design, but if you want to put it an ineffective or an inability to relate the individual pages to the home page, right? So just think of a DOM, document object model, or just think of when you land on a home page and then you have the about me and then the contact us and then the services, you're essentially seeing if you want to put it, slices of the pie, but essentially it's always about the pie, right? Some websites, though, are not well designed in thought, and so what happens is there's like a disjoint of the available pages. It's like you get there and then it's like one random page is like cats, like here's a random cat, and then the other one is like, do you want a burger or some random shit like that, right? And so to combat this, they came up with this metric of accuracy. And so my point is, though, if you're spamming and fucking essentially skewering this algorithm, you're also going to be fucking that up. But their solution to that was realizing or going back to essentially the relevance equation and understanding that if the Autobot is able to correctly read the page, then on some level you can essentially make a case for the fact that there is no unobtrusive element, right? There is no like weird characters that may cause for going from a mode where you're simply reading text to where now you're having to interpret like Cyrillic or some like weird arcane like symbolic language, right? Or you're having to essentially factor in or think about different artifacts showing up. And so at the same time as that's occurring, it allows you to cause the Kickstart process that keeps track of how each web page relates to the home page. And then that allows you to kind of compute the overall effectiveness of this particular web page to actually present the subject matter that essentially caused it to attract the Autobot in question for, right? And this is how I version to the second use case, which is burning fat or getting ripped, right? And that typically translates into burning fat and then increasing muscle, right? And obviously kind of going back to the same idea of the first use case, there's a couple ways of doing this, right? One way is just like the proper way, which is you just go run every day and then you also lift weights. So let's just call it the natural way, right? And then you also try to eat less, right? Let's just keep it that simple. And then the second way is using supplements. So you just ingest like you buy shit like creatine or a fat burner, right? And you don't really give a fuck about like the nutritional aspects of it, and you just essentially lean on that to do the fat burning part. And then you even buy another supplement to essentially ingest or infuse more protein in your body, just chemically shifting, if you want to call it, the operation mode of your body, thereby going from, like, you can think of I'm a fatty, so a high energy saver, so conserving a lot of energy and transforming it into fat, to like a cell producer, which is just like continuously producing new DNA, which causes the synthesis of ATP, which increases the metabolic activity, causing for you to always be in a state of sweat, right? So you pee regularly, and then you drink a lot of fluids, making you have that cycle over and over and over again, which is a raise in frequency, right? So that's another way of doing it. And then you can also even use that in like a negative Z fashion. Sorry, I'm going to just playing around with drugs and shit in order to get the result you want, right? Now, the point that I wanted to make in using this way is, if you think about it on a higher level, each level below it, so where you can go, remember the mind map of like the old days, right? And you have at the center getting ripped, and one way of doing it is the natural way, and the natural way involves losing or burning fat and increasing muscle via effort, right? And then its offshoot would be, okay, to burn fat, that's one big bubble, right? And to burn fat, that's like a, I guess like an opt bubble. You would have to do this, this, and that, and those are its sub bubbles, right? And then next to the connotated to that, like burning fat and losing muscle, you would do to essentially increase in muscle. That's an op bubble, which you can just say like a field. I'll probably make a proper video on this called Build 3. You would essentially have to work out and then cause for a breakdown of cellular structure, making your body do more, right? And those are its sub bubbles. And my point is, if you can take the mantra of like a scope on a sniper rifle, and based on the size of, if you want to call it the parent bubble, it causes for a bounding for the subsequent bubbles to come. And by that, you essentially understand the concept of volume, capacity, and frequency, right? So the volume of a particular subject matter matters a lot, because it literally denotes how much information is available about that particular subject matter, right? There's a ton of literature, people talking, videos, content about the art of burning fat, right? And vice versa for the art of increasing muscle, or even and gaining strength for that matter, right? That's a well covered subject matter, right? But for certain subject matters, if you want to call it, the repertoire is not as advanced. And so because of that, there is more of a traversal of the webs that the Autobot is going to have to undergo in order to actually pull up relevant and effective or accurate information, right? So the simplest way I put it is like, think of making a search like alchemy or magic or dark wizardry, right? There's not a lot of shit that would most effectively satisfy the desires, the educational desires of someone who would make those kind of search keyword requests. And so when it comes to that, it's almost as if by the user querying that on some level, he's also not just kickstarting in the process for, because you always think of the Autobot is always at the end trying to bring you something, right? So even if it's not pertinent to what you're asking for, he's still going to bring it. And so that means that sometimes it'll just pull in some random shit. And so you're left with a bunch, if you kind of like zoom out of this, you're left with like weird, just think of a network or just think of a circle, right? You're left with a lot of like disconnected information nodes or pieces that do not have an actual relation to each other, or that do but are mall proper because there is no relation between the sets. It's just a bot trying to give you something as opposed to coming back empty-handed. And so how they went about thinking about this is, I guess my first and second piece of information, or I guess relevant actionable intel for you, is everything you do on the internet, like when you're making content, from your account pictures to your account names to your brand names to your video details, even to the alt tags now, just make sure it stays consistent from one place to the other, right? So if you have a name on somewhere on Facebook, make sure it's the same on Insta and on Twitter and wherever else, right? And then at the same time, to my second point is, if ever you run into the situation where one place actually does not allow for a particular element or character, then just make sure the approximate is as approximate as you can. So me, for example, I like to title word videos with, for example, this series, most likely this video will wind up there, swag income, but I use the cash money character, right, as opposed to the capital S. And on LinkedIn, it's fine. It accepts it has a valid hashtag, but everywhere else, it actually sees it has maybe like a script code or something. And so I can't actually use that particular hashtag. Now, in situations like that, what I've just done is matched the rest of that word, so as WAGG and an income, in the exact way that I wrote it on the platforms that actually allowed it, right? And so because of that, there is still a match that is formed because the best case scenario finds the alternate version and makes the relation between the different content platforms. Now, my point in saying this is that all too often, I think, in being on social media and just doing a lot of shit, we wind up, if not careful, essentially siloing ourselves, right? So you do a bunch of shit on Insta, and you'll do a bunch of shit on Facebook, and a bunch of shit on LinkedIn, but you never kind of think of how to connect all of them together, right? And my point is, this is how. Just make sure you title and save everything in the same way. And then more specifically, make sure imagine you're an architect for a second, and try to come up with a way where ultimately all of those things are leading to a common place. Like it's going towards your website, like it's going towards your YouTube channel, like it's going towards your Facebook video channel, like it's going towards a particular hub of a sort. And the point in doing that is because we think that, like, oh, obviously people see this and the robot sees this, and what's going to happen is, oh, it's just gonna know. It's gonna know that everything is supposed to just be directed to your website. But that's not the case at all, right? Unless you actually say, hey, go to my website, or unless you just identicalize everything in this way, and then at the same time make it to where your website has like the if you want to call it the video channel playlist URL of all of these video series and podcast episodes, it's not even gonna know that it's a hub, right? So you essentially have to denote those or that particular landmark or digital estate in one unique or clever way or the other, or else basically you're just gonna have this situation where you're doing a bunch of shit but you're not actually building an ecosystem, which was my third point for, I guess, the final use case. So I mentioned attracting like higher quality girls or boys if you're a girl, and that would be defined as people who you have a natural chemistry with, who you have essential bond with. So you share the same sense of humor and outlook on the world, and even work temperament, right? So some people actually want to just play more and work less. Other people want to work more and play less. And some people are a mix of both, right? So you are a match on all of those levels, causing for that sexual seduction or that sexual moment to be so fucking epic. And so, which leads to then you just naturally having fun when you're being together, which makes it to where you wind up just spending more time together, right? The hallmark of a relationship. Now, think of a piece, think of the logic that would go towards the precision. Think of the logic that would go towards grading the relevance of a particular website for a query, right? Like that. First, let's take a step back and think of just the accuracy of a particular website for that subject matter, right? So let's go back to the mind map. It's attract higher quality people and have higher quality intimate moments, and essentially lead higher quality interpersonal relationships, right? And then you just you do that sub shoot again like before, and you think of the different Autobot bubbles, right? So one is attraction, the next is qualification, right? The next is actually closing, so actually asking them or going for the kiss, right? The next is understanding what you like and what you don't like, and then the next is something like understanding the sense of time, so knowing how to know if a person is a good friend or not a good friend, right? Like all of these different like subtle maturity IQ levels where literally it's so subtle, right? Now, how would a computer or the logic for this look? Well, it's quite literally impossible if you think about it, because on some level you're essentially thinking about building a robot, right? So when it comes to the practical executions of it, most of the time search engines or digital platforms there's a word called user agent, and that simply means think of your machine as a real entity, right? Like its own, your computer is its own person, right? And this person obviously is comprised of your browser history. It's comprised of all the applications you ever downloaded. It's comprised of all the folders that you've ever made and that is currently on there. And it's comprised of the operating system. It's comprised of like all of those intangibles, like pictures, videos, text, movies, and even like transient applications like messages if you've ever used it on your MacBook, right? And so the point is, when it comes to those kind of subject matters where it's so driven by relational contextual experience. So how much have you accomplished, and then how has that caused you to be the person that you are right now, right? They tend to essentially drive those answers by tapping into these pertaining computing variables, right? User agent, just look it up. You'll understand what I'm saying. Now, when it comes to like a topic like self-development or lifestyle engineering, that's typically how you build those kind of niches, right? It's why they strive so much on the aspect or the idea of execution or of reference experiences, of taking action, because the only way of growing or building something that is literally non-existent is by essentially continually putting yourself in the field and inquiring into the nature of something unknown, right? Kind of like a fucking Nostradamus. And so the pioneering element of that digital evolution is largely driven by the aspect of exploration, quite simply. And so when it comes to the relevance and this decision, or if you want to call it, the performance understanding of if what I'm showing you is actually what you're looking for, you are literally having to have a match on these three levels. You having had seen a video about it, right? You having had seen a video on self-development or lifestyle engineering. And then furthermore, you having had liked or clicked or shown explicit interest in the content at hand, sharing it, used one of the inbuilt call to action features, or even gone the extra mile and mailed it or propagated it to your immediate network itself. And then the third is you having had explicit invitation to partake in an event related to said subject matter, or even receive content pertaining to said subject matter, right? Those three things literally signal to, I guess you can call it, the Autobot's user agent handler that you are interested in this kind of information. And for those of you who understand like dynamic memory and the aspect of, basically think of you're going to the farm or you're going to the butcher and you're trying to plan for a party and you don't know how much meat you should buy. So you just plan for the 10x of the amount of people that you anticipate will come, right? And so in that same way, the memory and, if you want to call it, space allocated to allow for, if you want to call it, random mystery events that are open-ended in nature, has so well explained, tend to be derived from your overall excitation expressed way of communicating how interested the past permutative results of said subject matter have been to your overall research or development or curiosity, or if you want to call it satisfaction level, right? So when you see those surveys, it's like, how satisfiable was this call? Or how did we do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's essentially why they do that. It's kind of like eliciting or saying, hey, this was fucking awesome, and if you ever come across something like this again, feel free to just throw it out there to me, right? That's kind of what you're saying to the AI. And the point that I wanted to make and bring up lifestyle engineering specifically is that by driving this sphere of ecosystem, right? This, if you can call it, reinforcing feedback loop that is denoted by your actions, your desires, what you type into the search box, and how you respond to what's displayed to the page, you can kind of reverse engineer a way of consistently coming across on the digital world in a way that the Autobot always knows it's you, in a way that's you're uniquely referenceable across the entire internet, and more specifically, and to the last point, when it comes to displaying the changes that has been made on a web page, right? Like, so in the past, people, I think honestly the reason why those spam techniques rose in popularity was because people saw like oh wow, I just add in like money, or give me money 5 more times, and I go from rank 5 to rank 2, right? That immediate, if you want to call it gratification, showed or had that false perception of actual result. Because what's happening is you're actually not really going up in rank in terms of accuracy and relevance. Really what's happening is there's a bit more that goes into this, but I'll just simplify it as you're making it to where the Autobot has to make one less step to get to your website. Put simply, right? That's actually why you are being rewarded. It has nothing to do with the overall world ranking and, if you want to call it, engine optimization of your particular website or web page. And why ultimately, all too often, you would see how you would go up in rank and then you would go way fucking down. And not only would you go down, but on some level, you always got penalized. If you weren't getting flagged, then on some level, what would happen is you would go to like the page 5, and then no matter what you did, it's as if someone like shadow banned you or locked you into that particular rank until you did something dramatic, right? The point that I'm trying to make here is anytime you make a change on your webpage, what happens is that change has to propagate across the entire network that is the internet. And it has to propagate even through the dark webs, right? So it literally takes time for every single person that is on the internet to be known that you made a change on a web page. And why work done to improve awareness and traffic has to essentially account for the time factor. Well, not just in terms of propagation, I guess, cost, as I just mentioned, but also in terms of, I guess, impact, ecosphere, communication of said modulation, right? So just think of when you make a big change, like you create new pages and you do all the things I just mentioned in the positive way, then on some level you even change the relation that the Autobots or the crawlers have with your website. And those are the reasons why you end up seeing those dramatic increases in load. So like how much time it takes to get to your page, read, so how much time it takes to pull up everything that comprises a particular website, and then the overall refresh time. Engine optimization, but rather information retrieval, because I think if we think about the overall aspect of retrieving data on the webs, that's essentially what we're talking about, right? And the different logic that goes into the Autobot at hand in order to make this a reality. Now, I think the recording kind of crapped out when I was essentially speaking on the fact that oftentimes in the past, some of the spammy tactics that were employed when it comes to raising your rank in a particular search engine, I think their popularity essentially rose because people would see quick results, right? So they would see, oh shit, if I had like 10 more, 10 more additions of the particular keyword I'm trying to rank in on Google, I went from rank 5 to rank 2, right? And so that visceral, if you want to call it, immediate manifestation of whatever, I guess you can call it, work, quote unquote, that they were doing, made it to where the spammy SEO techniques that essentially cause for the rethinking of the ranking, performance, and overall engine result listing algorithms that we see in most of the prominent search engines today are having to essentially do a revamp, right? Because they realized that it wasn't working the same way that it was at its conception, and now they had to combat all of these spammers, right? And my point, I guess, where it ended was that if you think about how at the end of the day, that was not really boosting their popularity, because when it comes to relevance and accuracy, yes, you may essentially get a little jump in terms of the count that you have for a particular word. If you think about the overall smarts of these particular algorithms, you'll realize that it actually does nothing to boost your overall relevance score, right? Because remember that the Autobot doesn't just think about how many times you say the word, but it also thinks about the logical relations that you have to the particular subject matter string, if you want, or subject matter phrase that is created by a particular search query, right? And so you could have a high word count, but if your page is full of garbage, it really won't do much to the overall ranking or conclusive performance of your page in the functions of rendering noteworthy information for a particular subject matter, right? And I think that's kind of where the video or my recording crapped out at. I think I just literally ran out of space on my tablet. Now, the point that I was making is that what people didn't realize is by just increasing the word count for a particular search query word, what they were doing is just making it to where their website experience a small uptick in terms of speed load, because not to get into the meanderings of it, but the Autobot had to travel less in order to essentially retrieve their information. And so this particular, if you want to call it speed retrieval time, was reflected in the quick jump in rankings that was seen in the days of the past. So that's really what you were seeing. You were just seeing the Autobot retrieving your stuff faster. And so why now, when we've properly allocated or given it its own rubric, so page load or page speed, as you may have seen nowadays, it has quite, I guess, prominently been the something that has been shown to be distinct from actual relevance and information of your page information, and why oftentimes people cry because they realize that, oh shit, like I'm not able to actually really affect my overall ranking result, and no matter what I do, it's as if I'm just stuck at the bottom of the neithers, forced to cry at my fate, cry to Zeus. Now, I think the final point that I wanted to leave people with was that on top of obviously ensuring that you have an alignment in your digital presence, so your name on all social media networks should be the same, and then also any particular piece of content that you title on YouTube should be the same on Facebook or on Twitter, etc., etc. Another one also that I really wanted to, I guess, like leave with and kind of allow everyone to digest everything that has been said is that, and kind of the crux and the reason for this video is that when it comes to your content strategy development thinking, meaning the approach you have when it comes to building that mind map of topics that you're going to talk about, of, if you want to call it, unfolding or delivery of information that is pertaining to the subject matter that you laid out, and then specifically in the unraveling, the deepening and the lengthening of that particular subject matter in such a way that depth can be shown, in such a way that your own expertise can be essentially highlighted, and then in such a way that your own experiential knowledge on the matter can be demonstrated. You have to essentially have factor in mind, or you actually have to factor in mind the unfolding of time, right? And this was a bit that I kind of glanced at in the video, but my point is, there is such a thing as the law of growth. I talk about it specifically in my global development video. And that was essentially the sense that there are times, moment in time, when things are evolving at a rapid rate. When entire industries are experiencing an, if you want to call it, a complete overhaul in techniques, refinement strategies, and applications, and even technologies and equipment used for a particular endeavor, right? When that's occurring, just like in the industrial revolutions, ideas and eureka moments and relations are formed at a rate that is most likely not matched by the moments before, right? And so because of that, we basically make connections where we didn't make them before, and it causes us to even see insights that could not be gleaned before. This is simply because we are quite literally experiencing reality from a different set of eyes, from a different perspective, from a different perception and field of vision, right? And so that's when oftentimes our knowledge base grows and our understanding about the subject material increases as well. But then there are other times when we're literally just going through the rungs and the minutia of things, and we don't experience this rapid rate of growth, right? Now, this is quite obvious, but my point in saying that is that when it comes to the overall layering out or unfolding of your business development, right? The evolution of the growth that is your entity, that is your financial vehicle, you also have to have that understanding in mind, because the way in which you'll be spitting out the content that has to do with what you're doing, has to do with what you're talking about, and your overall, if you want to call it, permutative approach to how you're meeting a root problem challenge, it's also going to be in tandem with that particular growth rate cycles, right? So there are moments in time when your content might seem monotone, because on some level you're just covering the foundation of things, right? But then at that moment when a strong, if you want to call it, pillar foundational point has finally been etched, there is an upgrade and an upscaling in terms of the type of matter that you're covering, and even the depth of or scope that you'll be covering. And so you might verge onto a whole other knowledge base, kind of like swinging into a vine a la discrete mathematics intersectional sets, right? Now, the point in saying this is not to kind of like spook you out or to tell you that, hey, if sometimes you run out of ideas, it's okay. Or that, hey, sometimes if you have a whole bunch of new ideas, that's okay too. But it's to kind of allow you to have that, if you want to call it, second nature to, as all of this is occurring, to have the wherewithal to kind of like that good old Eckhart Tolle bro or bra, to take a step back, take a deep breath, and kind of try to see how all of these differing rate of growth cyclical moments are occurring in a way to form a big worldview picture, right? Because I think ultimately the part that leads to confusion and headaches in our business and our endeavors is when we lack perspective, when we lose sight of why we're doing all of this. And so by kind of forcing yourself to take a step back and figure out how all of these different pieces fit together in such a way that you can see the beautiful tapestry that it weaves, that you can essentially see the beautiful created puzzle that it makes, you can then allow yourself to see how a particular tangential piece can allow a specialized realization of an expertise, understanding, or insight that another one may not, thereby allowing you to tap into, I guess, the multi-varied part of your being that is your skill set. Anyways, hope this gave you some ideas, things to think about. Allowed you to put on that architect hat. Hope you guys got something out of this, and as always, swag the fuck out.